Orion. Welcome to the inaugural History Now here on ONTV. I'm your host, Anthony Taormina. With History Now, we're going to mention the history of, first of all, we're going to mention the history of History Now, and we're going to mention the topics later on in this broadcast. I want to encourage people to take a look at the show, and I'm going to bring up the format of History Now. In this, we're going to have, I'm going to bring up the topics. I'm going to bring up the, also the formats of History Now. I'd like to talk about my history, the introduction of History Now, to talk about and how it began, how it really came about. In 2011, I graduated from Oakland University in Rochester, Michigan, and I graduated with a history degree. I had a deep fascination in history. I had a talk about, that's all I ever talked about. Outside of my life with college basketball, history was my other topic that I talked about, and I was extremely proud of it. So then after that, I went to Orion Neighborhood Television, my history with ONTV.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ian Witherspoon, and I am between Taorminas.
You see here, me, my brother Sammy, and Ian Witherspoon all co-hosted Between Taorminas together. Between Taorminas became a rather successful phenomenon, and it still is to this day. So at the same time, with the success of Between Taorminas, able to accomplish several awards, including the Farnsworth Award that we recently won for episode 77 with Oakland University coach Greg Campy. We were able to come up with our own shows of our own. Ian Witherspoon, yeah, you can see his face right there. He has his own show for fantasy football that he talks about. He previews fantasy football. Sammy, my brother, the one that goes, "What? Who are you?" Okay, and the rather most charismatic figure of our show has his own OAA podcast. It's called OAA Now, which is actually airing now on Orion Neighborhood Television as we speak. But then, what about me? What about Anthony? Anthony doesn't have his own show. Is Between Taorminas just going to be Anthony's own show? Nah. So we debuted History Now. And how it works out is both Sammy and Ian happen to have Joe Velez as their producer. And also he helps them out. So I was able to acquire the services of the other Joe, the great Joe Johnson. The great Joe Johnson. He's an amazing man. And also, he talks about a lot of history as well. So we were able to connect and relate and came up with an idea, came up with a concept, and we both agreed that, hey, let's talk about history now. I mean, it's a cool concept. It's a very creative concept. And also, you know, it was a great idea that came out of, you know, basically the successes of Between Taorminas and then also the other shows as well. But this, in all honesty, also began when myself and Sammy first came into the ONTV studios at the old ONTV building. We went in the door, and at the time, Ian Locke was there. And me and Sammy proposed the idea to Ian. And Ian seemed to like the concept of Between Taorminas, which was, you know, me, my brother and I, and Ian, all of us, you know, our family and Ian are close friends since middle school. This is just an extension of everyday life. And the success of Between Taorminas ultimately triggered what you'd call, you know, ideas for myself, Sammy, and Ian to create shows of our own. And the success, and really we would not be in the position we're in without ONTV. So I'd like to give a big thanks to Mr. Ian Locke, also Tracy, also Joe Johnson, and also Joe Velez. So I give them a lot of thanks for taking three guys who were really, you know, not doing anything as much, and coming up with the idea of Between Taorminas, because without Between Taorminas, there would be no History Now. There would be no fantasy football preview show. There would not be no Lake Orion football preview shows or Lake Orion basketball preview shows, or even no OAA Now. So without ONTV, I owe them a great deal of service and gratitude to them, and and thank you very, very much. Throughout History Now, we're going to, when we come back, we're going to actually bring up the topics and the ideas of what we're going to discuss here on the inaugural Lake Orion History Now here on ONTV.
Residents of the Orion area are encouraged to safely dispose of toxic chemicals by attending one of several No-Haz events scheduled throughout the year. Orion Township will host an event on Saturday, September 20th from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. at Friendship Park and is free to residents. Drop off computers and electronics, paint, pesticides, cleaners, and batteries. A team of trained volunteers and professionals will be on hand to collect, sort, and package the items for proper disposal or recycling. For more information, visit nohaz.com or call 248-858-5656.
Welcome back to the inaugural History Now here on ONTV. I am your host, Anthony Taormina. During that break, I was able to come up with quite a bit of ideas for what we're going to discuss, and eventually in our future segments here on History Now. With my history degree, one thing that I always focused on was the wars. I'm going to go into great depth and great details about World War II, particularly in Europe, Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and even the Americas, how it impacted the Americas. Also, because there is a lot of stories out there, and it wasn't just, the countries you see in your textbooks that got impacted by wars or by other events that occurred, such as World War II. But we're going to go deep into specifics about the role of certain countries, what they played in the wars, and we'll go from there. Also, we're going to plan on covering World War I. Same kind of concepts for the history. We're not just going to cover the broad perspectives. We're going to go deep in depth about Europe, Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and also the Americas. Because if you look in World War I, you have to wonder what role Mexico actually played in World War I. Because it was actually Mexico that played a key role in the United States getting into World War I in the first place. We plan on also researching the American Revolution. It was the American Revolution, a lot of people don't know, it was actually considered it wasn't just a war between the United States and Britain, but it was also a civil war, a world war, and also a war with women, war with the Native Americans. I mean, it wasn't just a clear, the Americans, who at the time were British colonialists, against Great Britain, though they were at the time considered the British regulars. So the American Revolution, we're going to go into details about that. Also, the French Revolution. The French Revolution, it's one of the most important wars, it's one of the most important events that occurred, especially not just in France, but the impacts it has had on England, Europe, but also the United States, because the United States had a role in the French Revolution in more ways than one. We're going to look at discussing the role that the Americans played, but also the trigger of the French Revolutionary Wars, and also the Napoleonic Wars. One of the biggest debates that historians have is, are the French Revolutionary Wars and the Napoleonic Wars connected? A lot of historians feel the French Revolution ended in 1799. Others feel that they ended in 1815. We're going to have a few guests that come on in the future, and some are not going to always agree with me in terms of history. My view on the French Revolution is that the French Revolution ended in 1815 with the fall of Napoleon, because Napoleon arguably was just as much part of the revolution as like Robespierre and as King Louis XVI was. So I would make that argument that the Napoleonic Wars was just as much part of the French Revolution. And also another question that I get, was the War of 1812 part of the French Revolution? Yes, it happened during the time of the Napoleonic Wars. And the United States was fighting against Britain in Spain, particularly in Pensacola. So I mean, you have to ask that. Was the War of 1812 part of the French Revolution? That meant the United States indirectly was allied with France. In it, we're going to also discuss the role of the Civil War, the American Civil War. We're going to bring up what happened between the Union and the Confederates. We're also going to bring up biographies of certain figures in historical preferences, also local preferences. I'll mention the local preferences later, but in terms of the historical presences, such as President Washington, President Adams, President Jefferson, in also figures such as, or tyrannical figures such as Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, Saddam Hussein, and even in today's history, what's going on with Iraq, the results of the Iraq War, issues between Iraq and Iran, the Soviet Union, Afghanistan, what's going on with what happened in China, Japan. We're going to discuss a lot of those countries as well, not just in Asia, but also Europe. I mean, Germany, France, Spain, Portugal, Poland, Hungary. For those of you, I have a extensive report that I wrote about Hungary, and I'm actually writing a novel about Hungary as we speak, especially during the German occupation in 1944. I'll definitely bring it in and I'll share it with you, the viewer. I'm also looking at reviewing other events and how much they played a role into American affairs, such as what happened in the 1960s, Vietnam. I'm going to look into Korea, particularly North Korea, South Korea, and also the impacts of the relations today. Also going to mention the formation of the United Nations and the formations of the League of Nations and its predecessor. And we're going to go into specifics about history. Also, we're going to review the precursors to the history of the American Revolution, such as the 7 Years' War, the European wars, such as the War of 1648, involving the Habsburgs and the Bourbons, and we're gonna cover all of that. We're gonna go deep. We're gonna go into specifics. We're gonna go deep into the entire concepts and what caused wars, what caused these historical figures to be well known, and also what's going on today in history, such as what's going on in Iraq, the Ebola virus in Africa, and also, with Europe and also the United States, and also not to mention Canada and Mexico as well. So we're gonna cover that as well in History Now. We're also going to cover some local things as well, because it's not just the global aspects of history that we're going to cover, but I'm going to leave that to my third segment. All right? So we'll be right back with History Now here on ONTV.
Hey, this is Mickey York from Fox Sports Detroit. When I want to get the inside scoop on local sports, I watch Between Taorminas or Fox Sports Detroit.
As the summer begins to wind down, enjoy the transition into fall by loading up the family and taking a trip to Friendship Park for Barn Days on Saturday, September 13th from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. There will be plenty of activities for the whole family, including a petting farm, carnival games, inflatables, farm fresh produce, and a wagon ride. But be forewarned, you may encounter some Yankees and rebels who don't know the Civil War is over. The cost is $5 per vehicle, and proceeds help fund Orion Township's concerts and other events throughout the year. For more information, you can call 248-391-0304, extension 305, or visit oriontownship.org.
Welcome back to History Now here on ONTV. I was just writing some things that I was going to also discuss. The third topic, we're going to also bring up not just the global events that occur in today's society, but we're also going to bring up some local history. The history of Lake Orion, the history of Lake Orion, particularly Lake Orion the town, Lake Orion the city. We're going to also bring up basically well-known figures such as Miss Joanne Van Tassel, also the current supervisor of Lake Orion, Chris Barnett. We're also going to share some histories of other well-known figures in Lake Orion. I'm going to even share the history of ONTV to the viewers. I'm going to share the special history of not just myself and Sammy. I think because myself and Sam and I have a very good story to tell. I'm going to share our story with Asperger's syndrome and how we overcame and how we were able to be the successful men that we are. I'm going to cover local Lake Orion icons such as Coach Chris Bell, such as Lake Orion football, such as Lake Orion basketball, Lake Orion track, Lake Orion volleyball, even the drama theater, even the history of the Orion Township Library. I'm going to cover a lot of Lake Orion history because I feel that the viewers should learn a lot about Lake Orion, the town, and also we're going to learn about what makes Lake Orion unique, what separates Lake Orion from communities such as Oxford, such as Clarkston, such as Troy. What separates, other than the lake of Lake Orion, what's the myth of Lake Orion? The dragon. Who came up with the idea of the dragon? Going to also bring up Dragon on the Lake, that special event that occurs every year in Lake Orion. Also, we're going to plan on to look at in terms of Lake Orion, especially the rivalries Lake Orion has in sports, particularly with Oxford and Clarkston, and I feel like that there's a lot that people would want to know about the history of particularly the history of Lake Orion football, some of the rivalries that they've had over the years. Some of them you might not expect, like with Lake Orion, with Oxford, that they fight for the 00 trophy every year. Lake Orion right now is a total of 26, 7, and 4 overall against Oxford. Also 21-1 against Troy Athens, and 22-2 against Waterford Mott. Against Clarkston, Lake Orion is 21-25. Hope that'll get fixed very soon. But I'm going to explore those rivalries. I'm going to go into deeper in depth about those rivalries, and to also look at, the possible perspectives of going forward. Will these rivalries continue? Will these rivalries end? And just a lot of history that a lot of people might not know about Lake Orion football and Lake Orion back when they were competing in the Oakland-Macomb Conference, the goal, and also in the OAA. I also plan to explore the history of the Oakland Activities Association, the current league Lake Orion is in at present, and ask this question: Should Lake Orion leave the OAA? Should Lake Orion form its own conference with, say, Oxford and Clarkston, or maybe bring Romeo? I mean, it's a very interesting question. It's a question I tend to get very often because of the because of the history and some of the teams, especially down south, that Lake Orion might not enjoy, or might not, I wouldn't say enjoy, because I mean Lake Orion enjoys a lot of things, that might not have a rivalry with. Also, I'm going to go into Lake Orion basketball, the history of Lake Orion basketball. Also, other sports like baseball and softball and track and hockey and wrestling and lacrosse all have a very big history within Lake Orion. I'm also going to go further into exploring other departments of Lake Orion, like Lake Orion Band, or like Lake Orion Drama, Lake Orion Theater. I love writing, and one of the things that I'll once in a while stop by the drama theater, and some of my greatest ideas actually came from that drama theater at Lake Orion High School. Also go into the details of the history about Lake Orion, about the Lake Orion schools, like Lake Orion High School, Pine Tree Elementary, Orion Oaks Stadium, Blanche Sims, Scripps, Walden, Oakview. I mean, there's a lot of history there between all three schools. Also, Oakview recently had a movie that came out, In the Storm, that was actually produced at Oakview Middle School. So very, very big accomplishment for those at Oakview. We're also going to go into biographies. I made mention of In the Storm, that movie. I'm also going to look at some other movies, especially as we cover, as we go into a lot of movies have been made about World War II, World War I. Are some of them actually accurate with history? One of the things that I get from history, I'll take the movie The Patriot, for example, featuring Mel Gibson. With the movie The Patriot, it has a clear depiction of who's good and who's evil. There was not like that in actual historical times. There was no clear who was good, there was no clear who was evil. They tended to view the British in a very negative way. Well, they tend to view the Americans as heroic. It wasn't like that back in the days of the American Revolution. In the days of the American Revolution, they had the colonists at the time were just as barbaric, just as brutal as the British were. And that's not being mean, that's just stating historical fact. Sometimes with these movies, they do not state full-out historical facts or historical accuracies. Pearl Harbor, another movie. Pearl Harbor and Titanic, I feel both of them were extremely similar, though they both focus on love stories. Some of the movies, I view it a little bit more, they should just stick to and focus on historical accuracy. I think people want to know more about the historical accuracies instead of the historical inaccuracies. One movie that I have recently I'd heard and I had watched snippets of is Walking with the Enemy, which focuses on the German occupation in Hungary, featuring Ben Kingsley. With that, I noticed some inaccuracies. I did not see any particular, some of the figures in that, and I'll go over this when we share about German occupations of certain countries, particularly Hungary. There were some inaccuracies, and there were some characters in that movie that was really, really depicted as not in a good way, and certainly that they didn't have any role in. So I would strongly look at those characters in terms of reclassifying it, going further into depth in the history, and just really focusing on the history of events and not like over exploring them. I think that if you over explore events in history, things, or if you overdo it in Hollywood, because there's a big difference between historical accuracy and what they have in the movies. Not everything they say in the movies, or even the documentaries, is true. I'll use the example of the French Revolution documentary. I felt with the French Revolution documentary, they gave too much credit to one man when it was actually a whole group of people. It wasn't just one man, which was Maximilien Robespierre. He he should not have been in that position of taking full credit for everything when it was he was a part of a group of people. I think that people in the documentaries tend to give one figure too much credit, like the recent World Wars document, where you had pictures of like just Hitler making all the decisions, Stalin making all the decisions, Roosevelt, Churchill, all making decisions on their own. That wasn't the case. That was not the case at all. They had a group of people, and during history now, we're going to tend to go deeper into those people. We're going to go deeper into the decision makers. We're going to go deeper into the into truly history in the most accurate way. Truly in the most accurate way, we're going to go deeper into history. My final thoughts about history now is I feel like you, the viewer, is going to truly enjoy the show. I truly think that it's a whole nother side of me, whole nother side of Anthony that you've not seen before. You know, you tend to see myself being the cool, calm cat in Between Taorminas, or once in a while I'll scream out if I have to, mostly at Ian or Sam. But at the same time, a lot of people think that I just like sports, that's all. I'm pretty different. I'm a little bit different from Sam and Ian. I mean, I like weather, I like history. I like both. And I think you're going to see a different side of myself, and I think you're going to, hopefully, you guys will get to enjoy this, and hopefully get to like the show. I strongly encourage you to tune back in a few weeks. As for now, I'm Anthony Taormina. Have a great night for the first annual History Now here on ONTV.